What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Inner Circle. We are joined by this week's guest. So we're kind of breaking it down, and we're doing like months now. We've never done this before. We're doing hormone month right now. So we had Travis Zipper in last week, and this week we've got male hormone expert, Mr. Sam Miller himself. Dude, first of all, I appreciate your time coming in. Second of all, you have a really dope story that I think, we always talk about expert positioning, and like we talk about, here in the Inner Circle, how can they position themselves as experts and tell their own stories? Like, you got a really dope story. And before we kind of jump into that, let's not fuck around. Let's jump right into like male hormones. And, if you were to come in the Inner Circle and you scroll through the board and you see question after question and you see fat loss, body recomposition, performance, we know we're dealing with a calorie deficit. So one thing that you and I were talking about off the air kind of right before we went live is when do you say stop all the fucking madness, like when it comes to calorie deficits and the pursuit of fat loss and actually fix the hormones? And when do you potentially go ahead and actually live in the calorie deficit and fix the hormones later? Like, what's going through your mind there? Because I think a lot of people that are looking at this are like myopically focused. Okay, hormones, I got to fix it right now. But what is our gateway to even knowing when we should be fixing the hormones?
So, in classic fashion, I'll say it depends. As far as the particular client situation, whether you want to go to the calorie deficit route first or the hormonal optimization route first is really going to be dependent on what has that client done in the past before coming to you. So I'll usually give them, let's say their goal is a fat loss goal, enough rope to get started with a deficit, assuming they came to me in about a maintenance phase. We might do like a 12 to 16 week, almost like a contest prep, but just like a lifestyle prep for them to get in the best shape possible. Usually if after a couple months, they're not gaining positive traction with the deficit, you're not seeing the biofeedback and the measurement changes that you would anticipate, I think it's pretty clear, like you can't really just keep playing the deficit game much longer. You need to shift your focus to, I need to get this person to a place where hormones are optimized, because that's probably why they're not losing the fat.
You mentioned biofeedback. Is there any specific markers inside of that you think are like red flags more than others? Or is there any like lack of progress, or like what kinds of things can people look at right away and identify and be like, yup, like we got to go down the male hormone route? And when we say that, are we talking specifically about moving to blood testing to establish male hormones, or are we looking at other realms?
So, I think we're looking primarily at blood testing and salivary cortisol, and I think you have to do a lot of biofeedback and regular check-ins with your client and make sure your communication's on point before you just go send them the LabCorp request or like a SpectraCell to go get things checked out. It's so dependent on the person's diet history. Hopefully if there's one piece of advice we could take going into this, it's your intake form should really have some loaded questions that the client may not think are hormone questions, but they're going to give you a lot of insight as to where the person is coming from. So I'll strategically include a few that give me an idea of, all right, how long has this person been living in a deficit? Are they at maintenance? What diets have they tried in the past?
Right.
What habits are they trying to change right now? And if they come to me and they've already been trying to diet for a good while, and what they think honestly is a deficit, chances are we're probably not going to go in the deficit right away. We're going to hang out more at maintenance and go the optimization route. So I would prioritize your intake and biofeedback over the blood work to start, unless you have some glaring issues like, sleep is always a common one, energy, but muscle building and fat loss are, certainly signs too. So if you're not progressing on a program that's designed, whether it's linear periodization or any other type of strength program, if you're struggling, but they're eating, they have good compliance, good communication with the client, and they're putting in the work, then I think you kind of have to give the client the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, we're going to go down the blood work rabbit hole. Sure. And see how much give there is in their natural levels.
Right. So let's actually use your story as like a really good example. Let's say you go down that rabbit hole, you get some blood work, you come back, low testosterone. I think coaches immediately think, okay, testosterone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy. And that's not always the case, because as we know, right, there can be like long-term ramifications, fertility, all those things. You chose, like when you had low testosterone, not to go HRT route, and you've done a very good job of improving natural testosterone, or you've done a very good job of improving testosterone naturally. Dude, talk to us about what that looks like.
So I first, I guess, realized I had some symptoms in terms of immunity. Basically, high school going into college, I got really, really sick between semesters, and also was having some fatigue issues. I was lifting like crazy for a guy in their late teens. You'd think I'd be putting on a lot of muscle. I was getting very strong. I had a lot of neurological adaptations, but wasn't really having any size gains in terms of hypertrophy or muscle recomposition, I guess you could say. And it was actually, I think it may have been either my ART or chiropractic was also a naturopath at the time. He suggested that I go back to my primary care and get some labs done through my parents' insurance at the time. We checked it out. There was a phase, because I didn't know at the time, that the endocrinologist that I was seeing put me through a course of different types of medication and everything. But as I got older, what I was able to do is basically sustain my levels naturally through what I know now about training, nutrition, and supplementation. As far as jumping on the HRT route, this is something we talked about on the podcast, but I really think there are a lot of factors you need to look into. One is like lifestyle and family planning type considerations. The other is going to be your FSH and LH levels. If you have good FSH and LH levels and no signs of like pituitary or testicular trauma, you really do have some sort of chance at rebounding those levels. Other times things are kind of flatlined and you can't really get the greatest output from that. Also, your total testosterone is good, but you might really have some issues in terms of free testosterone, which we talked about on the podcast as well, just in terms of looking at the ancillary items that can impact testosterone levels. So I think when making that plunge to TRT, you have to think about lifestyle factors. Like, is this person, I think Travis does a great job of this in the NCI cert, is he'll mention like, all right, if this guy's just overweight and is having a ton of conversion from testosterone to estrogen, never really ate healthy before, never done resistance training, that's totally different from someone training hard. They're fully committed. They get their sleep. They're eating quality foods. I think in that case, you have to say, all right, this is a lifestyle decision. And for quality of life, TRT is going to make this person happier, stronger, more pleasant to be around. They're going to sleep better. It's just, I think in that case, it's totally fair to support clients going that route. I think TRT gets a bad rap sometimes, but on the other side of the spectrum, I think some people are too quick to kind of jump into it. So it's all about finding that middle ground.
Nice. Okay. So then when you didn't go to TRT and you've been able to, kind of do some things on your own, what were the things that you did? You said nutrition, training, supplementation. Can you shed some light on specific protocols? Maybe they were relative to you, but maybe, it might help some people in here to hear, some things that were used.
So, and I like to clarify too, just so everyone's kind of up to date on my stuff. So currently, no, I'm not on TRT or anything,
right.
But when I was much younger, they tried a lot of different medications on me, because mine wasn't just, it was a little bit like the nutrition and not knowing how to eat properly side while training hard, but also I did have, my endocrinologist assumed that one of the issues was pituitary trauma. So to address that, there are drugs like cabergoline and different types of more complicated things outside of TRT that we can talk about another time. They also did a small little bit of a TRT taper with me, but this was probably like 10 years ago. So from that is when I kind of launched my journey towards that natural hormone restoration route. Everything was centered around sleep, eating quality foods. I've pretty much been doing that for easily the last decade. And, throughout those periods, it's not like I was never able to go in a calorie deficit. It's just being really intelligent about when you go in a deficit and realizing that if you have a sensitive endocrine system, you're likely to probably swing 100 points or, a decent percentage depending on what your levels are. I know personally, I'm more prone to have a more rapid decline than if someone were just, didn't have any previous conditions or history. So that's where it's important in knowing the individual on a case-by-case basis and making those decisions. I've definitely noticed some positive effects from different herbals. I think to keep
which specific herbals?
Yeah. So I'll start with basically 3 categories. I think there's you can go the adaptogen route, the sleep aid route, and the other option would be more of something that's directly aimed at testosterone, preserving free testosterone, or like an aromatase or natural, like preserving your T to E ratios, or maybe reducing cortisol. So the adaptogens work on cortisol. The sleep aid also helps your circadian rhythm and optimizes testosterone growth hormone production. And then lastly, your natural herbals that are more on the testosterone production side. That's just how do you optimize your free testosterone as a natural athlete so that you can make the most of what you
Right.
have, and kind of block out any factors that might be decreasing your testosterone. So I think there might be some questions on this, so maybe save specific
Yeah.
supplements.
Yeah. We'll jump into more of that.
If you're a coach, I want you to think about it as 3 buckets. It's like the inverse relationship of testosterone to cortisol, so control cortisol, the relationship of testosterone and sleep, so control sleep, and then that third category being directly acting on the testosterone itself if you know that cortisol is not the issue and sleep isn't the issue. That third category might be more like symptomatic, like libido or energy or something like that.
Nice. Well, cool. Well, then let's jump into the questions. I mean, you kind of mentioned those. Let's see. I know there was a lot. The first is directly related to TRT. Chris Sexton asks, how do you reverse blood thickening from TRT?
So
what are your thoughts on that?
I think your best option, as far as if you're keeping your dosing consistent for your client and as far as following the doctor's guidance, the best way I know of is to donate blood. So doing this periodically depending on your hematocrit levels. So if you have a client who's on TRT, they should be getting a panel from their doctor that monitors more than just testosterone, because there are other risks. Essentially, when you're on testosterone, your red blood cell volume can increase. This can cause thickening of the blood and other symptoms. It's not a bad thing, because that can actually help your performance if you have more oxygenated blood or you're creating more red blood cells. But you can easily manage it just by donating blood. I'd say start at like biannually or quarterly, and then see how it goes based on the labs.
Okay, cool. Luke asked, since more sleep and de-stressing obviously is huge in helping someone raise test levels, what are your strategies that you use to help a client get more sleep and de-stress? And then Perry follows that up, how to identify hormone imbalance with male clients who have trouble sleeping.
Okay. So that first question, I take really simple lifestyle steps first before supplementation. So a great example is a lot of my guys, whether they're in the corporate world or they're also coaches, or maybe they're students, getting something for your computer that blocks blue light, or getting some glasses that block blue light, making sure your phone has night shift set up just to naturally do that, encouraging them to have a wind down routine. So I always explain to the guys that I coach that are dads, I was like, when you put your kids to bed, they have a bedtime routine. You as a man should also have a bedtime routine for your for your stress. So we start there. Because that can do wonders by itself, is just like unplugging at the end of the day. Although I'm guilty of, like, I struggle with that too. So sometimes you need to go the supplement route after that. In terms of your sleep, you're focusing on, I think it's a hormone side of things, but also what you're really doing is creating an optimal neurotransmitter environment before bed, which Travis talks a lot about this in the NCI cert, as far as your circadian rhythm and melatonin, which is going to be in your secondary hormone section. So melatonin is produced by your pineal gland. You need L-tryptophan to create that reaction. So something that can happen is tryptophan and serotonin can really help your sleep. So I've tried different interventions with clients. Some people respond well to like 5-HTP and GABA, theanine. Other people taking an adaptogen or taking something that's going to calm or mitigate their cortisol levels at night. That's just going to help them get better back into a routine. So you need to dive in further, I guess, with your question that you asked. I'd say, do they have a problem falling asleep, or do they have trouble staying asleep? Because those are 2 different issues. So if you're just kind of wired and tired at night, look at cortisol. If you need to stay asleep, maybe look at something that's more directed specifically at sleep, like some of those supplements I mentioned.
Got it. Okay, cool. So then Roberta asks, she feels like there's a lot of talk about female hormones, how to recognize issues, but what should we look at in terms of males? Like, what are the things that bring it about?
So comparing like what's triggering the symptoms, or just
like if you're working with a client, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on this in the terms of like, inability to build muscle, lose fat, right? But are there any other like glaring things that like you'll be talking to people and you're like, oh, that's a hormone issue?
Yeah. So sleep disturbances. And also, I think we had that second question under sleep, which was about sleep disturbances. I think that almost implies a hormone issue unless the person just like has been diagnosed with some sort of sleep disorder. So that was like part two under our last question. For this one, as far as the males versus females, I think you look at sleep, libido, energy, focus and concentration is kind of big. I notice. So personally, I can tell when I'm having variances in my personal levels over time from my biofeedback. It's my immune system and my ability to focus and my clarity. So I have a little bit more brain fog, if that makes sense. So some people show up on that side, which almost might appear as like a gut health kind of brain
Right.
fog is usually more gut health,
Yeah.
but testosterone can have a big impact on your clarity, your ability to make decisions. So if you have like paralysis by analysis a lot of the times, or you just can't think straight, like testosterone definitely helps with that. Sleep being another one, libido is another one. Like you should have a sex drive. And I
Right.
know a lot of our NCI coaches are including like things related to that biofeedback in their intake forms and their check-in forms. So regardless of whether you're directly talking to your guys about that or you have an outlet for them to communicate with you, definitely, I think we listed 4 or 5 there that you could probably hit on to narrow it down.
Yeah. Eric Elliott asks testosterone production and possible decline through CrossFit. And then he kind of completely goes to a different hormone and insulin and its effect with sleep deprivation.
Insulin. So that's like an insulin sensitivity sleep.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think what he's getting there is like his blood glucose tends to be a little bit higher than normal in the morning, and he's looking at sleep deprivation as potentially a cause. But I think the big one here for you, like as male hormone, testosterone production and decline through CrossFit.
Yeah, so that's kind of a we're going to plug the podcast here. So we actually talked a lot about this in terms of CrossFitters and the impact of endurance activities on luteinizing hormone, which for those of you who aren't familiar with luteinizing hormone, it basically is the signal in males for testosterone. So if you don't have LH, like it makes it hard for your testicles to catch up in terms of the total testosterone. All of your testosterone is on a feedback loop, so you need SH and LH to maximize your T levels. That's why when you replace testosterone, you will see FSH and LH bottom out because the pituitary no longer needs to signal the body to make it. So that's important to consider. As far as CrossFit goes, I think based on the volume of your training, whether you're eating enough, and also just how you're periodizing your program, you can definitely end up with testosterone issues. CrossFit, I'd say it's pretty common. The best thing you could probably do is reverse diet and add a little bit of.
I don't necessarily think it's directly because of CrossFit. I just think that as a society, we don't recover adequately. I think that CrossFit just tends to exacerbate that.
Correct. So it's not the label of the brand of CrossFit. It's more you could crash your T levels with any type of training. I mean, you could do bodybuilding or Orange Theory or anything in between. It's more think of your total volume of stress and like sympathetic inputs on the body relative to your diet and your recovery and your sleep. Sounds like if you're having some sleep issues, some blood glucose issues because of that sleep anyways, it's like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is that because of your CrossFit volume, or is it because of your blood work and your hormones and stuff like that? So,
although it's ironic because I know, like with Eric and his specific piece, right? Like he's trying to facilitate more sleep, which is like more carbohydrate ingestion, right? So like more recovery, and
right.
like his facilitating more recovery via food is actually negatively affecting his blood glucose, right? So it's like, at what point do you say, okay, I've had enough food, now I can go back to like lower carbs, more fats? But I think that the truth is like, until you pull out all the stressors, which is the training, which is the lack of sleep, which is all the other shit, like you don't get to pull out the carbohydrates and say, I'm going to create recovery just, from like lifestyle. I think that it's two completely different things, and they're so interconnected.
Yeah, I think they're definitely interconnected. And I would say, have you tried like a glucose disposal agent or something to improve your insulin sensitivity? Because you might be able to ride out the recovery phase a little bit longer and have more macros to work with, but get that insulin sensitivity improved. And also, when are you eating the carbs? That could potentially impact your blood glucose as well. And also, just if I don't know the situation exactly, but you could try carb cycling, or you could you could periodically have a reduction of carbohydrates on certain days, depending on your activity level, and plan it around your training. So I think you have a lot of options there before you have to immediately back out of that recovery phase. But I think if you try all those things and you don't see improvement in blood glucose, you may have to, take a step back a little bit. But the question is, you're going to have to prioritize one or the other. You're not always going to be able to fix your blood glucose and your T levels at the same time. So it's like, maximize one, and then hopefully one will help the other once you get one fixed.
Completely agree. Cool. All right. So the last question comes from Lauren Bergman. She says, depression and low testosterone. When is it appropriate to get on medication with depression? And is there a direct correlation to low testosterone?
Gotcha. So yeah, there's definitely, just because of how vital it is to guys functioning in both prehistoric ages through now in terms of our life, testosterone will definitely make you psychologically feel different. I've heard a doctor that I'm fairly close with, Dr. Conover, talks about testosterone being like the fun kid on the playground who's like the happy-go-lucky guy with lots of energy. So if your testosterone like that, if you're really low, it's going to make you feel psychologically low. Also, what sets off depression? Is it anxiety? Is it, if you don't have a ton of energy or libido, if you can't work out, you can't do the activities you enjoy at maximal level, you might be depressed as a result of that. So sometimes they go hand in hand. Sometimes one is a precursor to others. And then also from what I've seen, there are a lot of drugs for the treatment of depression that actually negatively impact your testosterone levels. So you have to be careful in terms of, because of how depression is more classified as a psychological or a mental condition or disease, like you kind of have to be careful in terms of, as a nutrition coach, you're not their psychologist, but you are an advisor for them.
There's a fine line between like mindset and psychologist.
So you got to be supportive, and certainly, like if their testosterone levels are in the tank, I think you helping them with their T levels will help with their depression, no doubt. But also you can't fix everything. So just be mindful, watch it if they have symptoms of it. But I would say, a lot of times they do go hand in hand, but that's going to be dependent on the person's personality. So someone who's maybe naturally a little more extroverted or thrives off of like social interaction and high testosterone is going to be very different than someone that's not really noticing it, or if they're not as passionate about their activities. I know a lot of athletes who would get very easily depressed, took away their training and their T levels were down or something like that. So,
yep. Well, totally. So that's it in terms of questions. So two things that I would love to get from you. First, we've talked a couple times already that there's a male hormone masterclass coming out in MCI. What should people expect from that? And then I'll ask you the last question.
Awesome. So, Jason and I have built this out over the course of the past couple months. The masterclass is designed to show you both the triggers that are causing these issues in terms of male androgen deficiency, but also even if you're not looking at male androgen deficiency and you just want to understand testosterone better, estrogen and the other hormones that interplay with testosterone, this class will be very valuable for you in understanding how they all have a relationship and need to be in balance. So we walk through and we talk about some of the causes, which could range from physical stress or chronic stress, so environmental factors versus internal factors, then break that down into how to remedy that. After seeing how it's manifested in the body, we'll walk through some scenarios. About 2 of them you can fix as a nutrition coach, and then there are going to be 1 or 2 that I'm going to make you aware of the problems that exist, but you might not be able to treat it yourself just through your nutrition coaching or training or strength and conditioning. So that's important to know. We'll also briefly cover some other foreign causes of testosterone or androgen deficiency, which could be from performance enhancement use, and kind of what to look for as a coach if that's something that's happened. We won't be going into
Let's be real, guys. Like, you're going to get people that come to you that have taken steroids. Like, it is what it is. It's just part of it.
Yeah. So we'll cover part of that, and then also talk about there are other performance enhancing compounds that will have a suppressive effect on your testosterone. I think, especially if you are a CrossFit coach or in other weight restricted sports where maybe steroids are less common, there are other performance enhancing drugs right now that, if taken in an abusive fashion at a dose that's too high, they will impact androgen levels. And there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. So we'll try and clarify some of that based on some of the studies that are out there, and also just talking about for athletes in general, what is the impact of something like a contest preparation or competition on your testosterone levels, and like where does that fall in the spectrum of the grand scheme of things. So it'll be everything from your 10,000 foot overview on the male endocrine system, and then following it through to your different variables, understanding cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, all that good stuff.
Perfect. And then, dude, final piece, man, like what can everybody walk away with? Like one piece of advice, like when you're looking at your clients and you're trying to understand like male hormones, like what is the first thing that's coming to mind? Like what should always be front of mind awareness, like when we're looking and dealing with male hormones?
So the one tricky part about male hormones, I think it's important we address it because we haven't talked about it a ton on this particular call, is just men are different than women, and women and their community typical cycle or feeling certain hormonal trends or patterns, because I think it's just natural. Right? Like females have a menstrual cycle that occurs every month, whereas guys kind of take for granted like the production and cycling of their hormones. So I think when you're approaching your male clients versus your female clients, you need to remember that like this isn't a topic that is super commonly available. There's not a lot of widespread information. Guys are largely misinformed about like what testosterone means, what it means if it's low, and how to help themselves if it is low. So first, I'd say be observant, be aware, but also proceed with caution and like create an open environment for your client. But you don't want to like, for a guy, especially if you have a client that has more of a has ego involved in their personality, you have to be very careful kind of juggling that. You can't just be like, oh, you have testosterone, I found out why you're not losing fat. Because for that guy, like that might seem like an attack. So especially if it's misunderstood. That would be kind of one piece of advice. And the next thing I would say is everyone, it manifests differently. So just have your tool belt and things in your arsenal that you can use to address it. But like we said with the blood glucose and testosterone example, or if it's a cortisol testosterone situation, like sometimes you have to pick your battles and fight something head on that's like the biggest issue at the time, and then work from there. So it gets really, really tricky when you're trying to balance a lot of variables. So one thing that I think the masterclass is going to be really helpful with, really help all of you with is it an estrogen issue that's impacting the testosterone? Is it a cortisol issue? Is it a previous drug or supplementation use that's impacting your testosterone levels? Is it nutrition or chronic stress? Because all of those are going to manifest themselves a little bit differently, and how you proceed as a coach is going to be different as well.
Absolutely. No, completely makes sense, man. Well, dude, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you dropping some knowledge on the coaches in here. Dude, I'll add you to the group so that if anyone in here has questions, they can ask. We'll make sure that, Sam's available to answer some questions. If you do have male hormone questions, would love to kind of just put that resource out. And, dude, I'm looking forward to the masterclass.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Dude, you got it, brother. See you later.